we're hoping that this roof, so we're going to start with plants and kind of go through those. So this is the Portland building right above our heads. This was last winter. So this is what it looked like in the winter. And then this is a close-up of some of those plants. And we'll talk about a lot of these. One thing about this roof is that in this plant report, we looked at numerous projects, and we did not look at this building and many other buildings because they didn't have a long-term establishment. We used a criteria of at least 3 years that the roof had been planted, since the roof had been planted. So now some of those buildings are actually turning 3 years old, but not this one. This has just turned 2 years old. But we have a lot of plants that have been planted here that are not on this list, and we will be looking at those. And so there could be quite a larger number of plants that we find that work on this roof that we would add in a year or two to the next report. So one basic question a lot of people ask is why sedums or other succulents? And what we've sort of a little bit of history about that. If you look at the history of eco-roofs or vegetated roofs over the past 1,000 years where they've been used in various communities, often you see pictures, for instance, the old sod houses in the Midwest of the United States. Actually, if you look at the Midwest back many centuries ago, some of the native people used to have mounded structures, kind of like the Viking mounds. The Mandan tribes in the Midwest had these mounds that were covered with soil and grass predominantly. And then in Europe, they had a lot of grass roofs and that type of thing. So somewhere along the way, the Germans, it appears, and this is my conjecture just from kind of looking at how things go, but since the Germans have been so involved in this, and maybe it should be attributed to a Swiss, but at any rate, they've been doing more than anybody else. And so they've used sedums and succulents, predominantly sedums. And so they found that the sedums in Germany and that type of climate work best for for addressing numerous issues associated with this concept of a vegetated roof. And in talking to a person that I know from Malmo, Sweden, I asked why was it that in Malmo, Sweden, or large portions of Scandinavia, they had basically stopped using grass or vegetated roofs. And he said that 150, 200 years ago, they were using grass roofs extensively more and more in the urban areas that they had, and they had a major fire that was attributed to a drought that they had, and the grass that they used to have 2 or 3 feet of grass on these roofs was sort of looked at as the cause of that. Whether it actually was or not, he wasn't sure. So, of course, we mentioned last week, and we'll continue to mention that currently we're looking at this idea of sedums and succulents because one, we don't have to worry so much about this issue of grass in our environment because we're in the western United States. We have hot, dry summers, and that means it's hard to keep grass green and doing well on a roof without watering it a lot. So we'll get into those kinds of discussions in a minute. Anyway, that's just a little bit of background on why we have chosen to say, okay, the model from Europe is succulents, so we're kind of starting with that model, and we're going to continue. But we're not opposed to learning about other ways of doing this besides this particular concept. One of the things about succulents, these are some shots near the Oregon coast. This is one of our native sedums. It's called Sedum Organum, and it's in our report, and it's a good native sedum. And you can see here how it's growing. It's growing on this rock area. There's some other plants here that are a little bit hard to identify. And notice this area around the sedum. See all these kind of light-colored twigs or whatever you might call them? That is also Sedum Organum that has died back. So the characteristic of sedum in our environment, and you'll see it on some of the other shots, is it does grow, it does die back in the summer if it gets a lot of intense heat. And it's not necessarily a bad thing that you have to worry that, I need to water this necessarily, because this helps protect the soil and the roof, even though it's not green, and you still have the basics of the plant that are still there. And then this is just another shot. And so look at all these other plants. This is one of those steep areas on the coast somewhere. And so there's some more Organum right here, but there are a lot of other plants here. And these may be also good candidates for eco-roofs in our region, but So there's a lot to learn about what other plants would work well. And this is Sedum Spathiphyllum, we found out. And it's growing on another natural area, and you can see it's characteristic. This is spring. And yeah, and this little guy coming out of some crack in the rock and such. So they like growing on rocks. They do send some roots down into areas that are cooler and moister, but they basically like that kind of rocky surface. And actually, I have a little sample that I brought in from my yard. I put it in this tray just to carry it. I'm not trying to say this is a tray that you should use, although it's kind of interesting. But this was growing on brick in my yard. So there's only about, well, you can see that's how much soil there is, and it had just grown, thank you, over a period of time. So it likes some unusual conditions that are not typical garden-type environments. Anyway, so then two authors of books, Krukberg has said, to be sure, sedums avoid wet and shady places, so they won't be found in forest or bog, but in a rocky place or sunny outcrop glade in the woods, expect to find a sedum. Now, there's one little variation of that in the Northwest anyway. I'm not sure where Krukberg is from, but you will find sedums, especially Sedum Spathiphyllum, in the shade. It won't be in a wet area in the shade, but it does like shade. And you can see it growing on rock in the shade in a lot of areas, especially up through the gorge if you take a ride through there. You go through the gorge in the spring and you notice on the rock outcroppings you'll see a lot of little yellow flowers. Those are often Sedum Spathiphyllum flowering early spring. And then Stevenson, who's someone in England, has written another book, and Dave's got it there. So this has about hundreds of species of sedum, and he's from England, but on the cover is our native Sedum Organum. So it's a pretty spectacular plant. And then he says, as you can see there, little nutriment and little warmth.